If you've been seeing headlines about a government shutdown and you're confused about what that actually means and why this keeps happening, you're in the right place. I'm going to explain exactly what a government shutdown is, what it means for your life, and what's likely to happen next. A government shutdown occurs when Congress has not passed the appropriations bills needed to fund federal agencies. Here's the basic mechanism. The Constitution gives Congress control over government spending. Each fiscal year, Congress is required to pass funding legislation for federal agencies. When that legislation expires without renewal, affected agencies cannot obligate funds, which means they cannot maintain non-essential operations. So, what actually closes? Services designated as non-essential are suspended. National parks close to visitors. Passport processing stops. Some federal employees are furloughed without pay during the shutdown period. Many government websites stop updating. What continues operating? Social Security benefit payments are issued. Medicare processes claims. Military operations continue. Border security functions remain active. Air traffic control operates. Any function classified as essential to safety or national security continues. The practical impact scales with duration. A shutdown lasting a few days primarily creates administrative delays. A shutdown extending multiple weeks creates more significant disruptions for federal workers awaiting back pay and for individuals needing government services. Here's how a shutdown might affect you directly. If you're expecting a tax refund during a shutdown period, IRS processing is delayed. Your refund arrives later. If you've planned a trip to a national park, you'll find it closed. No entry, no services. Your plans change. If you need to renew your passport for upcoming travel, processing stops. You may miss your trip. If you're a small business owner waiting for an SBA loan approval, that process freezes until the shutdown ends. If you work as a federal employee or contractor, you may go without pay for the duration. Federal employees typically receive back pay after a shutdown ends. Contractors often do not. The severity depends on length. Most shutdowns in recent decades have lasted a few days to 2 weeks. The longest on record was 35 days, from December 2018 to January 2019. You might be wondering why this keeps happening. Government shutdowns were rare before the 1980s. Since then, there have been more than a dozen funding gaps that resulted in shutdowns, some lasting multiple weeks. The pattern changed as appropriations bills began to be used as leverage in broader policy negotiations. When Congress cannot reach agreement on funding terms, and neither chamber or party has enough votes to pass legislation without the other's support, negotiations can extend past the funding deadline. There's a deeper story about how congressional budget processes evolved over several decades. I'll cover that in detail in another video. For this video, the key point is funding gaps have become more frequent in recent decades compared to mid to late 20th century practice. So what typically happens during a shutdown? Usually one of 3 outcomes. First, Congress passes what's called a continuing resolution, temporary funding legislation that maintains current spending levels for a defined period, typically a few weeks to a few months. This allows negotiations to continue while agencies remain funded. This is the most common resolution. Second, one chamber or party accepts terms it initially opposed, often as public pressure increases. Federal workers missing paychecks, closed services affecting constituents, and sustained media coverage tend to intensify pressure for resolution. Eventually, negotiations produce a compromise that can pass both chambers. Third, the shutdown extends for multiple weeks. The longest shutdown lasted 35 days. Extended shutdowns create compounding effects, larger backlogs of work, more workers affected by missed paychecks, and greater service disruptions. For the current situation, the same dynamics apply. The timeline depends on whether negotiators can agree on funding terms, or whether one side determines the political cost of continuation outweighs the cost of accepting a compromise. So that's what a government shutdown is, how it affects your life, and what typically happens. These funding negotiations are part of a broader pattern in how American government operates today. If you want to understand more about those changes, subscribe. Thanks for watching.